Jan Berry. If you can hear us okay, you can stay in the back. If you're like I am, you might want to move up a little closer. This is a pick-me-up discussion on writing about the Vietnam War era. There are a number of people in the audience who have also been working on it in various kinds of ways.
What? U.S. Embassy, Hanoi. I was stationed there 2 years ago with CDC.
Ah, neat. You know Bill Earhart? I think most people do. And we're joined by John Ketwick, who's also an author of a memoir about the Vietnam War. I just wanted to go over a couple of things real quickly in terms of continuing on this theme. Of course, it only dawned on me like March 1st that it was the 50th year anniversary of the Marines landing in Vietnam. And I quickly put together a PowerPoint presentation that I present to college students and high school students and anybody else who wants to listen to it. But the most amazing thing that you can find on the internet these days, I was in Vietnam in December 1962 when it was all hush-hush. The memo is now online. January 1962, the Deputy Defense Secretary Kilpatrick says we need a cover-up story, which is what we were all about until Tonkin Gulf, was doing the cover-up stuff. It's now out there. It's on the internet. So I encourage people to, whenever possible, do a quick search on the kinds of things that you've been talking about for years, but you never quite could show the document. They're starting to pop up on the internet. Thank you.
I'm not quite sure what exactly you all are expecting to have happen here. Well, I mean, I can keep you here forever. Time means nothing to me. And we might be doing something that's of interest to you, and we might not be. I'd rather hear from some of you as to why you're here and what you would like to do with the about 50 minutes that we have. We have lots of microphones up here. They're all over the place. So if anyone would like to get a discussion rolling, I mean, Jan and I can talk about what we've been doing since he started in 1970 with Literature of the War. He's one of the original editors of Winning Hearts and Minds. How many of you know that book? There you go. And both of us have. I was a contributor to the book, not an editor, but the First Casualty Press. We were all young, and it all came apart by about 1974. Actually, you remember those when we were doing DMZ? Jan and I decided we would do the book that First Casualty Press was planning to do and never did because they scattered to the wind. Jan had already departed. There was some acrimony involved in all of that. And we were young and angry and pissed off at everything and everybody. And so when Jan and I were trying to find out what happened to First Casualty Press, there were a lot of letters flying around and stuff. And thanks to you, all that stuff is now in the LaSalle Library. And I can look at the stupid stuff I was saying when I was 26 years old, to guys who are now very dear friends of mine, Wayne Carlin being one of them. Randy knows Wayne. Goodness gracious. I hope people ignore all of that stuff. Anyway,
where's LaSalle? Which LaSalle?
LaSalle University in Philadelphia has all of his archives. They've now got all of mine as well. They actually have, if you're interested in the literature of the war, LaSalle University has a collection called Imaginative Representations of the Vietnam War. It is the best collection of its kind in the world. It contains virtually all the literature, films, television shows, games, knickknacks, poster art, everything, imaginative representations of the Vietnam War. My Rambet doll is in there. When my daughter was born, a friend of mine, knowing my politics, bought a Rambo action figure, but transformed it a bit. Gave Rambo high-heeled shoes and a sequined rocket launcher and a few other things, and altered the title of it so it's Rambette. That's in the collection. They actually gave me $50 for it.
You mean your daughter let you have it back?
Oh, she was an infant. She didn't even know I had it. Anyway, we've been at this stuff for many years. And I can obviously talk forever. I would like to spend this time doing some things that you want to be doing with the time.
Well, I'm John Ketwig. It's May, and that means my book was published in May of 1985, so fairly officially it's been on bookstore shelves for 30 years straight. It all came about by accident, so I'm kind of pleased with that. So, whatever you and Bill decide to do, I was invited to join these two fine fellas, and it's a pleasure to be here. We'll go right along. What's the name of your book? Name of the book is And a Hard Rain Fell. Paid Bob Dylan $350 for that, but he needed the money. One of the most amazing things I ever learned, I was actually a factory rep for Rolls-Royce for a while. And do you know Bob Dylan owned a Rolls-Royce? That just destroyed me. That ruined the image. But
Yeah, really? That was after he fell off the motorcycle.
yeah, it's probably.
How do you accidentally write a 300-page book?
You're asking that?
It was an outpouring. It was a letter to my wife and kids trying to explain why Daddy's a little weird. And this finger typed, and that one does capitals. And for 9 months, every night and weekend, I tried to put the story down on paper and everything, and purely by accident, it evolved into a book. So everybody needs a hobby, Bill.
Yeah, I happen to know all these guys. I'm sure a lot of you do. What I'd love for you to do is, I'd love to hear some of each of your work and talk about what you wrote about Vietnam, but I know that you're all still involved in these movements for social change. Warrior Writers comes to mind, the things that came out of your writings that are still healing and helping veterans, particularly anti-war veterans of today, is something that would be real important for me to have you talk about.
Yeah, my name's Paul Giannone. I just retired from CDC, so I actually have some time on my hands, which is good. I wrote my one and only book. I'm a veteran of Vietnam. I'm a veteran of the fall of the Shah. I'm a veteran of the boat people. I'm a veteran of landmine clearance in Angola, Cambodia, Afghanistan. I was on the Afghan-Pakistan border 2 weeks after 9/11, being guarded by a man with a shotgun. I wrote my book. It's called Dear Cora, One Man's Journey from War to War, because after she was born, I thought I was going to get killed way out in one of those horrible places. My work is mostly with refugees, landmines, emergency response, and planning. But, you know, one of the reasons I'm here is maybe to try to garner support. The publisher who did it was horrible. I'm in my third rewrite. It never really hit the market. And I'm working with a journalist. But one of the things that's in my 40-year history, and I've been trying to say this at this meeting since I got here, and I think the anti-war movement, the peace movement is wonderful. But it's really a good part of a much bigger issue. And the issue is a pattern of failure amongst our foreign policy that starts even sometimes way before boots are on the ground. You know, the sending of the wrong people, how they're trained, what they think in their heads when they hit the ground can be 5, 10 years before we end up with soldiers, or we just end up with bad programs. The pattern is there if anybody just wants to take a hard look at it. Now, and I announced this here too, I just filed a whistleblower disclosure against CDC. Because I'm sitting there, it started coming out when I was stationed in Hanoi trying to set up the Vietnamese Ministry of Health's Emergency Operations Center. It was the same pattern all over again. You know, not sending the wrong people out who don't know anything about Vietnamese culture, who don't know about their jobs. And we did it in Sierra Leone just recently. It's ignoring our own research, putting people's lives in danger. And I don't know how to get that word out. And the irony is I listened to John Kerry, like, God, I listened to the government again. Go the legal route, go whistleblower. So I filed this whistleblower complaint, 31 pages, 71 documented references, and their response was they declined it because, they said, well, you have obviously a personality problem between you and CDC. Wait a minute, I got quotes in here from the Lancet on this. And so I've written them back and said, no, you keep this case open. And so, but again, I guess I'm here because I'm a frustrated vet. And I've seen too many guys go into combat zones when we could have ended it 10 years before, 5 years before.
So you asked why we were here and what we hope to get out of this. And one of the reasons why I'm here is because I have written what I think is perhaps the latest contribution to the literature of the Vietnam War. It's a novel, and it's about some of the least noted veterans of the war, which is the women who served in Vietnam. It's called Her Own Vietnam. It was published in November of 2014. I've got a stack of these. I'd be glad to pass them around. But I am very proud to be joining with the proud tradition of literature that has emerged from the Vietnam War and that I hope is informing people as they think about activism that we can take for our current wars.
Did you serve?
I did not serve. This is a book of fiction, and it's based on 14 years of research.
I don't think it'll go that
I wonder
far.
how much.
It's not going to go that.
I'm definitely going to need to leave.
Here, we got plenty of seats up front here.
Anyway, I'm Nancy Saunders. I write under the name Nancy Miller Saunders because that's the way the vets knew me. They knew me before I met my husband. I first got involved with Vietnam Veterans Against the War in 1970. I helped, I worked on the films of VVAW's first 2 major actions. At the second one, the introduction was written by Jan Berry, and I quote from it in here. I was so impressed with the anti-war vets that I vowed to keep trying to tell their story. And I worked with them through the Gainesville 8 trial, which was when the Nixon administration completely discredited VVAW. I mean, it already infiltrated it with all sorts of informers, provocateurs. I even taped a 2-day debriefing of one whose cover we broke. He ended up being the star witness against the Gainesville 8. And I think that's one of the reasons the jury quickly returned a blanket acquittal. But anyway,
It took 2 years.
No, the trial, no, they were indicted in July of 1972, and the trial ended on Labor Day 1973. We just almost 2 years ago, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of that acquittal.
It just seems like forever.
Oh.
Because I worked with Mahone in New York. So.
Yeah. You know.
Yes.
It did seem to last forever. And in memoriam on the back of my T-shirt, the bottom name, she was at the 30th anniversary celebration, and she was the jury foreman. Anyway, a number of the veterans entrusted their stories to me to tell, and I have used my story of getting involved with filming them, getting to know them, living with and working with the South Central Regional Coordinator, the 2-day taping with the informer, working on the Defense Committee for the Gainesville 8. And in 2004, I could never find a publisher because my thesis is that the truth of Watergate is that it was an attempted coup d'etat that was to be blamed on the veterans. That was the 8's defense case, and the judge ruled it inadmissible. But fortunately, the three most articulate defendants went pro se, so they could go up to like the informer, Bill Lerner, and say, Bill, don't you remember when we did such and such? And pin him down, and as I say, the jury. But anyway, I have material on it here, and one copy of the book. Here.
Nancy,
Pass
what's
it around.
the title of the book?
The title of the book is Combat by Trial. It was going to be Bill Patterson's. He was one of the defendants. He died before he could get it done. We had agreed we would share material. I stole his title, and it's Combat by Trial, an Odyssey with 20th Century Winter Soldiers. But I had to publish it in 2008 by myself because I was so afraid that Bush and Cheney were going to try to pull the same thing, that I rushed it out. Yes?
I have a question for you. 2 questions. Where's Bobby Mueller and any representative, senior representative from Vietnam, VBAF here today?
I'd like to know.
I know Bobby's had a hard time. I knew him.
No,
way back.
this was Bob.
Bob Mueller.
Bobby Mueller.
Oh, Mueller.
I think that,
I don't-
that he was asked, and
I've been away from the New York area for so long.
yeah, he and he's not here. Ron Kovic is not here, and that is also because he is currently unable to be here.
And I tried to get Scott Camille here too.
Is Scott here?
I tried to get him here and he wouldn't come.
Yeah, Scott is not coming.
Bobby Mueller is somewhere in Washington.
He's in D.C.
I know that, and I've heard some negative stuff that he's having hard times, but I've never been able to follow it down. Like I was close to him years ago, but no.
We're having a reunion here.
Mostly, I think he's kind of burned out on all this stuff and is taking some time to focus on himself.
What, does anyone here know or have been participating in the Witness to War program?
The which?
I thought we.
I was interviewed by him, and it's a Library of Congress thing where they're trying to interview veterans and have them tell their stories about Vietnam. And I think it's, they interviewed me for 40 minutes, and the wonderful thing about it is they interview you, and they take it, they're going to edit it, but they give you the interview back, 3 copies. You can use it any way you want.
They're
So-
doing it here.
They're downstairs.
They're downstairs.
Are they?
Yeah.
Okay, good to hear, good to hear. Because it's, I think the more we speak, the better we're off. And we can't forget, let people forget. But anyway.
I think the tapings are scheduled to restart at 1:30.
Yes.
Okay. And I will leave my cards here. If anybody who wants, my book, I can't give you this because I don't have any left. It's out of published. But if anybody wants to look at it, they're more than welcome. And I'll leave my cards here. And if anybody got any ideas of what I should do with my life, please call or when I grow up.
One of the problems with these interview projects is that they don't discriminate at all. You know, somebody who thinks we should have nuked Hanoi and fried Jane Fonda in cooking oil is treated with the same validity as somebody who understands this was a crime. I'm very dubious of this archival stuff.
The only thing I'd say against that is if you let all those conservatives talk and none of us talk, then we're really screwed.
Well, that's true.
Is anybody here aware that Scott Camille has worked closely with an oral project at the University of Florida? Okay.
There have been a number of oral histories that have been done around VVAW in particular, that many of us have participated in. I think a lot of people who in the VVAW Vets for Peace group have a hard time doing government-sponsored interviews because we've had occasion not to trust them for a good reason. Hey, you guys, let's get some poetry and writing talked about.
Yeah, you're going to have to.
Where I've been an anti-war and social justice organizer for a long, long time. And what I wanted to talk about was the uses of poetry. And I've got your books with me and how we used those books. While other people were trying to talk in political science classes in high schools, we were talking in English classes. And the we was a Vietnam Marine Corps vet friend of mine and I, and he would go in and he would read some of his own poetry, and he would read you guys' poetry, and I would read Vietnamese poetry in translation thanks to Don Luce, and then later as we got into Central America wars, Latin American poetry, we would get the kids to talk about how those two kinds of poetry had a different tone and a different mood to them, and then the teacher would get the kids to write us a note about what they'd gotten out of it, and it was pretty amazing and good work. And I want to say, I guess I want to say thank you, and I might even want you to sign my books.
Oh, thank you.
Annie, you had, oh, go ahead, Randy.
I was in Eugene in 73 to 75. I wonder if we met. I rise because I taught Winning Hearts and Minds for decades. I'm an English teacher too, and at Lemoyne College in Syracuse, New York, I discovered this book, and I was teaching an intro to poetry class, and I would put this book with the lyrical ballads, and I would get them to see. First, we would read this, and then the lyrical ballads, and I'd get them to see that this was doing the same thing that Wordsworth was doing. But from that emerged my teaching the literature of the Vietnam War for decades at Tulane and then at the New School for Social Research. And I found that, first of all, that those of you who are teachers, you might agree that the hardest part of teaching is motivating the students. And that the literature of war does the job for you because it grabs the audience by the throat and says, listen to what happened to me. And the literature of war basically boils down to the abuse of power and 19-year-olds getting screwed. And what 19-year-old in your classroom can't relate to that? So half your job is done. I love teaching the literature of war. At Tulane, I got to know Ron Ridenour, the My Lai whistleblower, later an investigative reporter. And he would come to my class and blow my students away with his mesmerizing voice. He died suddenly in 1998, and out of that came the Ridenour Prizes for Courageous Truth-Telling, which now in its 12th year, we just had our luncheon at the National Press Club, where we give prizes either to investigative reporters or whistleblowers. So I rise in part to let y'all know about that. So, email me at randy@fertel.com or go to ridenhour.org, and you'll see the work we do in keeping his story and the story of My Lai alive. I think the story of what we can do in war is really important going forward. We've had so many My Lais since then. And Ron's deepest held conviction that I heard him articulate many times in my classroom was that My Lai was not an aberration as they wanted us to think, that it was one of the tools in the military toolkit that they pulled out when they felt they needed it. And Nick Terce's book, Kill Anything That Moves, based on a Nation article, My Lai a Month, a quote from a colonel who blew the whistle on the operations in Quang Nam Province, and Quang Nam Province, I think. Totally support Ron's conviction. As does Jonathan Schell's Military Half, written before My Lai came out. He talks about the destruction of 70% of the hard targets in Quang Nam Province, which included thatched huts. And that was before My Lai came out. So I'll shut up, but Bill and Jan's poetry I've taught for years. And one last point. In teaching war literature, one of the things I learned was that until a literature of war begins to embrace the enemy and begins to listen to the voice of the enemy, it's basically an adolescent enterprise. And even like Tim O'Brien's masterpiece, The Things They Carried, in that incredible story, The Man I Killed, it's meant to be read as a projection of Tim. It's not really a Vietnamese that he's describing. It's someone like him who had grown up in Vietnam. But Bill's poem Hunting is really about knowing that that's a person that we killed, that you killed. And I think Jan, do you have a poem about In the Footsteps of Genghis Khan, or my? Is that yours? I think those are poems that acknowledge the history and culture and personhood of the enemy. Jonathan Shea's work, Achilles in Vietnam, argues very persuasively that when we dehumanize the enemy, we dehumanize ourselves. It increases the likelihood of PTSD. And there's a green sheet here that someone handed out, half of which is about American literature of the war, and half, the other side is, yeah, thank you. And the other side is the Vietnamese literature. It's really important to begin to embrace the enemy's voice and see them as people.
Yeah, I handed out that list because what I found is, with a lot of teachers, they didn't know anything about Vietnamese literature. And when my teaching picked up was around 1996, some major US publishers started publishing books by Vietnamese writers, like The Sorrow of War by Bao Ninh, and the first book of a Vietnamese writer who got a lot of trouble with the party there, Duan Thuy Hoang. She's done about 6 novels, and they're spectacular. And the response of my high school kids, and these weren't the top kids, was phenomenal. And I've also used poems. There was a small press called Curbstone Press. They're now an imprint of Northwestern University. Wayne Carlin did incredible work with a Vietnamese writer. Her name is Lee Min Quay, and they did an anthology, The Other Side of Heaven. And there's a story in there about a united Vietnamese couple. They're about to have their first baby, and it's called The Sound of Harness Bells, and it's about Agent Orange. And the kids just went apeshit, pardon my language, but over this story. And,
I'm shocked.
But just to see how it humanizes the Vietnamese people as opposed to either some vague victims, So, yeah, I think it's very important.
Yeah, one of the problems I have always had with the foreign language literature, it's why in none of the books I've edited and co-edited have I included Vietnamese voices, because I have no way of judging how good the translations are. I have no way of judging, is this poet representative of what is going on in his country? I can look at American poetry about the Vietnam War and I can tell what's bullshit and what's worth reading. I can't make those kinds of judgments about the Vietnamese poetry, the Vietnamese literature, and so I've tended to stay away from it, although this is sort of separated from, David McReynolds was mentioning it last night. We tend to imagine the Vietnam War as this thing that happened to a bunch of American teenage boys. And in fact, the Vietnam War is what we did to them. Guys like us were a sideshow. The British Army lost more troops in the first 12 hours of the Battle of the Somme than the United States lost in the entire Vietnam War. If you built a wall that listed the names of the dead Vietnamese and Laotians and Cambodians, it would be as big as the Vietnam Veterans Memorial at its deepest point, all the way from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument. I mean, it is. It's a good distance between the Lincoln and the Washington. But it is important to humanize the other side, but it's also, in terms of doing it as literature, I just can't trust what I'm reading in English translation.
One of the things...
It's better given that some of the translators of Vietnamese, quite a few, that I would trust that, and that it's better to have it. I agree.
Could you guys...
Latin American, you said the same thing about Latin American literature, but then nobody would ever read Pablo Neruda or something like that.
But to get to you guys, I don't think you guys are a sideshow. Never did. But I think it's important for what I think you guys did was help us take responsibility for what our country's doing. And I think you're still doing it. And could you all talk a little bit about Warrior Writers, Combat Paper, teaching current students that you're doing with, you're still using your voices?
Well, for the last 14 years, I've been teaching high school, a private boys' school in suburban Philadelphia. The complexion of the place has changed both ethnically and economically, but the center of gravity is still well over to the rich Republican right. I've done some other teaching prior to that, but you know, another problem that I have in terms of teaching is that you got one semester, maybe a year of high school teaching. I teach a course on the Vietnam War. It lasts 4.5 months. I go back to the origins of Chinese occupation of the Red River Delta and try to take it up to the present, but there's only so much you can do with high school kids. I have listened over the course of the last decade and a half since our wars in the Middle East. I've really struggled with that because you have these young soldiers coming back and talking about, oh, the war is terrible, we're all screwed up, we got PTSD, and I know it's totally, utterly irrational of me, but I can't help feeling in here, duh, what the fuck were we talking about for the last 40 years? I'm sorry if you weren't listening. There was no generation of us, when I was their age, saying the kind of stuff we've been saying all our lives, but that's totally irrational because, by and large, how much do our voices show up in public schools or anywhere else? And what has sort of changed allowed me to feel a little less irrational about that is that I keep coming upon Iraq and Afghan veterans who write to me having read my work, unfortunately too late to save them from joining, but helping them make sense of their own feelings once they've come back. Jan actually has an essay the most coolest thing that's ever happened to me in my life. It's a book of essays about me and my writing, and the last essay in it is written by a Marine sergeant who served in Iraq, and he talks about the impact that when he came back a mess, and a professor of his said, "You should read this guy Earhart." And it absolutely changed Clint's life. That's cool. I'm not changing the world, but I made that kid's life better. That's all right.
That's the major impact that we've been having. Well, in both VVAW and Vets for Peace, we had a march in Washington on a weekend 2 days after the war started because we just chose a date. And we knew then we had to get ready for angry vets coming home and help to form the basis for supporting Iraq veterans against the war. And then we had a 40th anniversary gathering in VVAW in Chicago, and I had a table with some copies of Demilitarized Zones there. And there was a young man sitting next to me doing some artwork and something about Iraq, and I said, "What are you doing? Can we exchange information?" His name is Aaron Hughes. He was the beginning of doing artwork and then writing projects that came out of IVAW, but it's grown much larger than that. And so this is the latest anthology that has, it's called Warrior Writers, that has both artwork and writing. And this is the amazing thing, by Iraq veterans, Afghanistan veterans, Vietnam veterans, Somali War veterans, and attempts to do something that we didn't have even when we thought we knew what we were doing in VVAW. Real ongoing dialogue, support. The Facebook activity is incredible in terms of somebody says having a really bad day and 6 people jump into the conversation and said, "I'll take you to lunch. What else do you need?"
Jenny Pack, get your dogs,
Yeah.
and let's go.
That's right.
What's the name of it again? So where can we get it?
Warrior Writers has a website, so you can just go to warriorwriters.org, I believe it is. And that's the 4th. This is the 4th in a series of anthologies that come out of workshops. The other thing that a young woman named Lavella Kalika added to all of this, because she started working with IVAW in Philadelphia in the early days, and she writes poetry. And I asked her one day, "How did you learn what you did?" She says, "I just tried different things." She has workshops with prompts, and people write about various things, which is the basis for much of the writing that ends up in these anthologies. And then you have conversations that come out of the prompts. And the same thing is true with the combat paper art making process. Just even cutting up a uniform, somebody will suddenly say, "I just remembered something, I've never talked about it."
Do you guys know about combat paper? Anybody here, everybody here know about combat paper?
Then we have the conversation, it's cutting military uniforms up, turning the paper into artwork. But in the process, somebody says, "I've never talked about this before." And then we say, "Oh, how would you illustrate that? How would you write about it?" It's no longer just, I told my story. How are you going to tell that story to the world? And then when they have art shows, family members come and for the first time ever understand something about their son or their daughter that they never wanted to have the conversation about.
I want to
One
say, just briefly, I'm sorry.
One thing I've been thinking about is we need to establish some kind of repository for all of this writing, artwork, also the films. You talk about influencing someone. I have no idea why my husband's VA doctor ever worked for the VA, because he had no respect for veterans until I made him watch Winter Soldier. Complete 180. And he became the biggest supporter of veterans. He'd make sure that, he'd go check on all of them when they were hospitalized, and just different man. Just like some of the literature and the poetry. so we need, you know, I don't know how to do it, I don't know where to do it, but we need some kind of repository so that all of this material is accessible.
Waskow University, imaginative collection, imaginative.
University of Arkansas is not the place.
Waskow University, the Winter Soldier film. This guy collects.
Ideally, material should be in a number of different places, and people with IVAW, this group of artists and writers that I'm talking about, just put together a booklet of both their artwork and some of their writing, high quality work, which already has been picked up by major university libraries, etc. That's another way of thinking about what we're doing. On the art level, it's suddenly different than a pamphlet. It's the same material. It is the same material.
I would like to say that I am in touch with and find myself in touch with high school and college students, particularly high school students. I'm amazed at the number of courses about Vietnam that are still being held 40 and 50 years after the war's over. Somebody, a teacher somewhere in a high school in Georgia, feels it's important enough that they continue to put on a class about Vietnam. It suddenly dawned on me one day that I was very much in touch with some World War II veterans and never thought I would ever be one myself till the draft came along. The time period between World War II and Vietnam was 20 years. We're talking 40 and 50 years, and there's still people saying, hey, young man, you know, it's important for you to think about what Vietnam was all about. Come in, sit down, and let's talk about it for a semester. That's amazing to me. Unfortunately, a lot of those courses, you have to kind of lean to the right in your chair as you sit and listen. But they do invite some of us to take part, and I've had some wonderful communications back, not just from the students, but from their parents that say, thank you for making my kid think. We're getting old, folks, I hate to say, you know, but one of these days, that generation is going to be the people that keep America going. And I've got kids, and now I've got grandkids, and I just want to sow seeds and try to stir some of these kids to think. They do. They really do if you challenge them a little bit. So I think it's the most important work I can do, and I'm overjoyed at the opportunity. If I can get my way in the door of a high school, I do, you know.
I think you guys are doing